"If that truck starts, I'll eat my keys." The declaration echoed across the service yard of North Star Logistics in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a sprawling 50-acre compound of warehouses, maintenance bays, and parking areas where 200-plus semi-trucks sat waiting for loads, repairs, or retirement. The words came from David Chen, 43 years old, senior mechanical engineer for Scania North America, wearing a company polo shirt, khaki pants, and an expression that mixed frustration with absolute certainty. He was standing next to what had become the most expensive paperweight in North Star's fleet, a 2019 Scania R730 V8, a Swedish-built powerhouse that represented the pinnacle of European heavy truck engineering. This particular unit was painted deep metallic red, with chrome exhaust stacks, aerodynamic fairings, a sleeper cab luxurious enough to be confused with a small RV, and an engine that, when functioning, produced 730 horsepower and 2,500 lb-ft of torque from a 16.4-litre V8. Diesel. The truck cost $285,000 new, 3 times what a comparable American-made Peterbilt or Kenworth would run. North Star's owner, Marcus Thompson, had bought it as a flagship for their premium logistics division, hauling specialized high-value freight that justified premium rates. For 18 months, the Scania had performed flawlessly, logging 340,000 miles across North America with reliability that made American trucks look primitive. Then, 3 months ago, the truck had simply stopped, starting, not gradually. One day it worked perfectly, the next morning the driver turned the key and got nothing but cranking. No fire, no run, just endless starter motor engagement with zero combustion. North Star's maintenance team tried everything. New batteries, new starter, fuel system diagnostics, computer scans. Nothing worked. They called Scania's regional service center in New Jersey. Technicians flew out, spent 3 days troubleshooting, found nothing conclusive, recommended sending the truck back to Sweden for factory diagnosis. Shipping cost alone $45,000. Marcus refused. He brought in independent diesel specialists. He contacted technical schools. He even tried a mechanic who claimed psychic ability to diagnose vehicles. That was a desperate week Marcus preferred not to discuss. 23 different technicians over 90 days. Diagnostic bills exceeding $38,000. Zero progress. The Scania sat in the yard like a $285,000 monument to failure, taking up space that could house a working truck. Marcus was about to cut his losses, sell it for parts, recoup maybe $80,000, chalk it up as an expensive lesson in buying European equipment without local support infrastructure. David Chen, the Scania engineer, had flown in from the company's New Jersey headquarters for one final attempt to diagnose the problem. He'd spent 2 days running every test Scania protocol required. He'd called engineers in Sweden. He'd reviewed computer logs, checked voltages, measured resistances, verified fuel pressures, and he'd concluded professionally, definitively, that this truck's problem was beyond field repair. It needed to return to the factory. Marcus had asked one more time if there was any other option. David had gestured at the Scania and made his declaration about eating keys if it ever started again. The person who was about to make him regret that statement was standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching the entire exchange with the calm expression of someone who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Rachel Martinez was 41 years old, owner and lead technician at Martinez Heavy Diesel in rural South Dakota, a 3-bay shop specializing in farm equipment, commercial trucks, and anything with a diesel engine too complicated for regular mechanics to handle. She was wearing Carhartt coveralls, steel-toe boots, and had grease under her fingernails from a combine repair she'd finished that morning before driving 7 hours to Minneapolis. Marcus Thompson had called her 3 days ago as a last resort. Someone had mentioned her name on a trucking forum as the woman who fixes impossible diesel problems. Marcus was skeptical but desperate. Rachel had listened to his description of symptoms, asked a few questions, and said she'd drive up to take a look. No promises, no guarantees, just curiosity and a hunch. She charged $500 for the diagnostic visit, plus fuel costs. Marcus figured $500 was cheap compared to the $38,000 he'd already wasted. Now Rachel stood in North Star's yard, listening to David Chen explain why this truck would never run again without factory intervention, and she was fairly certain she knew exactly what was wrong. Before we go further, I want to ask, where are you watching this from? US, another country? Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever solved a problem that multiple experts said was impossible? How did that feel? Let's build a community of people who refuse to quit. David finished his explanation and looked at Rachel with professional courtesy mixed with condescension. Ms. Martinez, I appreciate Marcus calling you in for a second opinion, but I've exhausted every field diagnostic procedure Scania has. I've been an engineer with this company for 12 years, worked on V8 platforms specifically for 7. This truck has a catastrophic failure in either the high-pressure fuel system or the engine management computer that requires factory-level diagnostics and replacement parts we don't stock in North America. With all respect, unless you have access to Scania's proprietary diagnostic software and direct communication with Swedish engineers, there's nothing you can do here that hasn't already been tried. His tone was polite but final, the voice of someone explaining reality to someone who didn't understand complexity. Rachel nodded slowly. I appreciate the overview. Mind if I take a look myself? David gestured at the truck. Be my guest. But I'm telling you, you won't find anything. And when this truck inevitably doesn't start, I hope Marcus will finally authorize the factory return. Rachel walked to the Scania, running her hand along the red paint, looking at the truck like a doctor examining a patient. She walked around it slowly, checking tire pressures by sight, looking under the chassis, examining exhaust tips, peering into the engine bay through the tilted cab. Scania cabs tilt forward hydraulically to access the engine. David and Marcus followed, watching. Rachel pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and shined it into various spots in the engine compartment, not touching anything yet, just observing. After 5 minutes of silent examination, she straightened up. Can I see the service records? Everything that's been done in the last 3 months? Marcus handed her a thick folder. 90 days of failed attempts documented in detail. Rachel sat on the Scania's front bumper and read through every page methodically, occasionally making notes in a small notebook she pulled from her coveralls. David checked his watch impatiently. After 20 minutes, Rachel closed the folder. All right, I think I know what's wrong. David's eyebrows raised skeptically. You've diagnosed a problem in 20 minutes that 23 technicians and Scania's own engineering team couldn't solve in 90 days. Rachel shrugged. 23 technicians who all made the same assumption. You're all looking for catastrophic mechanical or electronic failure because that's what your training and experience tell you to look for. But sometimes the problem isn't catastrophic, it's simple, and simple problems are invisible when you're only testing for complex failures. David crossed his arms. Okay, I'll bite. What's your theory? Rachel stood up and walked back to the engine compartment. The Scania V8 diesel uses a common rail high-pressure fuel injection system. Fuel pump builds pressure to about 29,000 psi. Stores it in the rail. Computer fires injectors with precise timing. For that system to work, you need 3 things: adequate fuel supply from tank to pump, functioning high-pressure pump, and proper electrical signals to injectors. According to these service records, you've verified fuel supply, tested the high-pressure pump, and confirmed electrical signals. Everything tests good individually. So why doesn't it run? David nodded. Exactly. That's why it needs factory diagnosis. There's something wrong with the system integration that field diagnostics can't detect. Rachel shook her head. Or there's something wrong with an assumption everyone's making. Tell me, when you tested fuel supply from tank to pump, what method did you use? David consulted his notes. Standard flow test. Disconnected supply line at pump inlet. Cranked engine, measured flow volume. Got 4.2 liters per minute. Specification is 3.5 minimum. Flow is good. And fuel pressure at the pump inlet. Didn't measure. Pressure specifically. Flow volume indicates adequate pressure. Rachel made a note. Assumption number 1. Flow doesn't guarantee pressure under load. What about return line from the fuel rail? David looked confused. Return line? That's just overflow. Excess fuel from the rail returns to tank to prevent overpressurization. Right. But if that return line is restricted, where does the excess pressure go? David started to answer, then stopped. Rachel continued. If the return is restricted, excess pressure stays in the rail. The pressure relief valve tries to compensate, but if it can't relieve fast enough, you get overpressure conditions. The engine computer sees that, interprets it as a dangerous fuel system fault, and inhibits injection to prevent damage. Your rail pressure might be testing fine at static conditions, but under cranking load with the pump actively building pressure, you're over spec. Computer shuts down injection. Engine cranks, but won't fire. David's expression shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. But we tested rail pressure during cranking. It was within specification. Did you test it at the rail, or did you test it with the computer's sensor reading? David checked his notes again. Sensor reading. Computer reported 24,500 psi during cranking. Specification is 23,000 to 26,000. Well within range. And if the sensor is reading low? If actual pressure is 31,000, but the sensor reports 24,500? The implication landed. If the pressure sensor was giving false readings, the computer wouldn't see a problem, but the mechanical relief system would be struggling with overpressure, and the computer's fuel injection strategy would be based on incorrect data. David pulled out his laptop, connected to the Scania's diagnostic port, started pulling up sensor calibration data. Rachel walked to the rear of the truck and crawled underneath with her flashlight, following the fuel return line from the engine back to the tank. She found what she was looking for about 15 feet back: a fuel return line filter, a small cylindrical component designed to catch debris before it entered the tank. This filter wasn't standard Scania equipment. Someone had added it as an aftermarket modification, probably thinking it would protect the tank from contamination. Rachel unscrewed the filter housing and pulled out the element. It was completely clogged, packed solid with a waxy substance that looked like paraffin contamination. No fuel could flow through. That meant when the high-pressure pump built pressure, excess fuel had nowhere to go. Pressure climbed beyond spec. The relief valve tried to dump pressure, but had no return path. The system went into overpressure fault. The computer, not detecting this because the pressure sensor was slightly out of calibration and reading low, tried to compensate by shutting down injection. Result: engine cranks but won't fire. Rachel brought the clogged filter to David and Marcus. Found your problem. Aftermarket return line filter completely blocked, probably installed by someone trying to protect the fuel tank, but it's preventing pressure relief, causing overpressure faults that the computer can't see because your rail pressure sensor is reading about 20% low. Fix is simple. Remove this filter, replace the pressure sensor, bleed the fuel system, clear the computer's fault memory, and it'll start. David stared at the filter, then at Rachel, then back at the filter. His entire diagnostic theory had just been dismantled by a clogged component that wasn't even in Scania's parts catalog because it was aftermarket. He pulled out his phone, called a contact at Scania Sweden, explained Rachel's finding, asked them to check sensor calibration specs remotely. 10 minutes later, the Swedish engineer confirmed the pressure sensor was indeed reading low, probably had been since installation. It was within tolerance enough not to throw a code, but inaccurate enough to mask overpressure conditions. The aftermarket filter was the restriction causing overpressure. Remove filter, replace sensor, problem solved. David hung up and looked at Rachel with an expression that mixed embarrassment, respect, and disbelief. You were right. Scania confirms the sensor calibration is off, and that filter shouldn't be there. How did you know to check the return line? Rachel shrugged. Because your service records showed fuel supply flow was good, high-pressure pump was functioning, injector signals were present, but nothing about return flow. Everyone was focused on supply side, getting fuel to the engine. Nobody thought about return side, getting excess fuel away from the engine. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Blocked return was improbable but not impossible. So I checked. Marcus, who'd been watching this exchange in silence, spoke up. Can you fix it? Rachel nodded. Need a replacement pressure. Sensor Scania part number should be in your system. Need to remove that aftermarket filter. Need to bleed the fuel system and clear computer codes. 2 hours of work, maybe 3 if I'm slow. Marcus turned to David. You have that sensor in stock? David checked his inventory on his laptop. New Jersey warehouse has 6. I can have one overnighted here by morning. Marcus looked at Rachel. Can you stay overnight? Fix it tomorrow. Rachel checked her phone calendar. I can stay, but I'm charging $200 for the repair plus parts. And when this truck starts, not if when Mr. Chen here owes me a video of him eating his keys. David's face went red. The keys comment. He'd forgotten about that. Marcus started laughing, genuine, relieved laughter after 3 months of frustration. Deal. And David, you better prepare a nice sauce for those keys. The next morning, the replacement pressure sensor arrived via FedEx at 8 a.m. Rachel got to work. She removed the aftermarket return filter completely, capped the lines properly so fuel could flow freely back to tank. She replaced the faulty pressure sensor with the new one, torquing it to exact specification. She bled the high-pressure fuel system using Scania's procedure, required a special diagnostic command to open injectors while cranking to purge air. She cleared all stored fault codes from the computer's memory. She double-checked every connection, every line, every electrical connector. By 11 a.m., she was done. David, Marcus, and about 15 of North Star's staff had gathered around the Scania to watch. The truck had been dead for 90 days. 23 technicians had failed. The company's own engineer had declared it unfixable, and now a woman from South Dakota was about to either prove everyone wrong or join the list of failures. Rachel climbed into the driver's seat. Premium leather, air suspension, more gauges than an airplane cockpit. She buckled the seatbelt, habit, turned the key to accessory position, waited for the glow plug indicator to show preheat complete, then turned the key to start. The starter engaged. The massive V8 diesel cranked. Once, twice, 3 times. Then caught. Fired. Settled into that characteristic European diesel idle, smoother and quieter than American trucks, the sound of 16.4 liters of precision engineering doing exactly what it was designed to do. The exhaust note was deep, confident, healthy. Every gauge showed normal readings. Oil pressure climbed to specification. Coolant temperature began rising appropriately. The computer dashboard displayed no warning lights. The Scania R730 was running, actually running, for the first time in 90 days. The crowd erupted. North Star employees cheered, some clapping, others shouting in disbelief. Marcus Thompson had tears in his eyes, not just because the truck was fixed, but because he'd been vindicated in refusing to give up, in making one more call, in trusting someone everyone else had dismissed. Rachel let the engine idle for 2 minutes, listening carefully for any abnormality, watching gauges, making sure everything was perfect. Then she revved it gently. Smooth power delivery, instant turbo response, no hesitation, no smoke, no drama. Just 730 horsepower ready to haul freight. She shut it off, climbed out, looked at David. "Runs good. You owe me some lunch entertainment." David stood there speechless for a moment, then started laughing. Not embarrassed laughter, but the kind that comes from recognizing you've been schooled, and there's nothing to do but accept it gracefully. He pulled his keyring from his pocket, held it up. "You actually expect me to eat these?" Rachel smiled. "I'll settle for an admission on camera that a country mechanic from South Dakota solved a problem Scania's engineers couldn't." Marcus already had his phone out recording. David looked at the camera, took a breath, and spoke with genuine humility. 3 months ago, this Scania stopped starting. 23 technicians, including myself, failed to diagnose the problem. Today, Rachel Martinez from Martinez Heavy Diesel in South Dakota found a clogged aftermarket fuel filter and a miscalibrated sensor that none of us thought to check. She fixed it in 3 hours. I was wrong when I said it couldn't be fixed in the field. I was arrogant, and I learned something today about assumptions and thoroughness. Thank you, Rachel. You're a hell of a mechanic. He extended his hand. Rachel shook it. Apology accepted. And for the record, you're not a bad engineer. You just got stuck in a diagnostic loop where everyone was testing the same things the same ways. Sometimes you need fresh eyes. Marcus paid Rachel $1,800, the agreed $1,200 loss, plus a $600 bonus, because she'd saved him from a $45,000 shipping bill to Sweden. He also offered her a consulting contract, $5,000 per month retainer, to be available for difficult diesel diagnostics on North Star's fleet. Rachel accepted. It was steady income. For phone calls and occasional site visits. The Scania went back into service immediately, assigned to a driver named Tom Rodriguez, who'd been waiting 90 days to get his favorite truck back. Tom drove it on a 2,400-mile round trip to Los Angeles, hauling medical equipment. 0 problems. Perfect performance. The truck logged another 280,000 miles over the next 2 years without major issues. David Chen flew back to New Jersey, filed a detailed report with Scania Sweden about the diagnostic. Failure. Recommended updated training for field technicians about checking return fuel systems and verifying sensor calibration independently rather than trusting computer readings. Scania implemented the changes globally. Thousands of technicians received updated diagnostic procedures, all because Rachel had questioned an assumption. The story spread through the commercial trucking industry, not viral social media spread, but the deep professional network spread that happens when mechanics talk. To mechanics, other diesel shops heard about the woman who'd fixed the unfixable Scania. Other fleet operators called her for consultations. Rachel's phone started ringing with requests from across the Midwest. She hired 2 additional technicians to handle the increased work. She expanded her shop from 3 bays to 6. She bought specialized diagnostic equipment for European trucks, Scania, Volvo, Mercedes, because American shops rarely invested in that equipment, creating a niche she could dominate. Within 18 months, Martinez Heavy Diesel had become the go-to shop for complex European truck repairs across a 6-state region. Revenue tripled. Rachel hired a business manager so she could focus on technical work instead of administrative tasks. She started teaching weekend seminars at technical schools, $500 per student, teaching diagnostic methodology, critical thinking, questioning assumptions. The seminars filled up months in advance. Students learned not just how to fix trucks, but how to think about problems differently. David Chen became one of Rachel's biggest professional advocates. When Scania customers called with difficult issues, he'd often refer them to her for consultation. They developed a professional friendship built on mutual respect. David appreciated Rachel's field experience and creative problem-solving. Rachel appreciated David's engineering knowledge and access to factory resources. They collaborated on several complex cases, combining their strengths. The Scania incident became a teaching case at engineering schools. Example of how overspecialization and rigid diagnostic procedures can miss simple solutions, how diverse perspectives solve problems that homogeneous teams can't. Several universities invited Rachel to speak. She declined most, accepted a few, always emphasizing the same message. Expertise matters, but so does curiosity. Never stop questioning. Never assume the last 20 people who looked were right just because they were credentialed. Trust your instincts. Check the obvious even when everyone says it's been checked, because often, the answer is simpler than anyone wants to believe. Marcus Thompson kept that video of David's apology. He'd show it to new hires during orientation, using it to teach a lesson about humility, about listening to non-traditional experts, about how the best solutions sometimes come from unexpected places. North Star Logistics bought 2 more Scanias over the next 3 years, confident they had Rachel as a resource if problems arose. The flagship R730 that had sat dead for 90 days became the fleet's most reliable unit, logging over 600,000 miles before major overhaul. Tom Rodriguez, the driver, said it was the best truck he'd ever driven. Smooth, powerful, comfortable, efficient. He retired on that truck 5 years later, and Marcus gave him the keys as a retirement gift. Tom had them framed with a photo of the R730 and a plaque that read, "The Truck." 23 couldn't fix, but Rachel could. Rachel never sought publicity, declined interviews from trucking magazines, didn't maintain social media, focused on work. But her reputation became legendary anyway, because excellence creates its own publicity. People who do exceptional work get noticed regardless of whether they seek attention. The Martinez Heavy Diesel logo, simple text, no flashy graphics, became synonymous with capability. When truckers saw that logo on a service truck or a mechanic's coveralls, they knew they were dealing with someone who solved problems instead of making excuses. So one final time, where are you watching from? And what's your version of this? When did you solve something experts said was impossible? When did you question an assumption everyone else accepted? Drop it in the comments. Because Rachel Martinez proved that credentials matter less than capability, that fresh perspective beats institutional knowledge, that the person willing to check the obvious thing everyone else dismissed often finds the answer everyone else missed. Let's build a community that values results over resumes. Together.